So that's kind of how we've got to where we are. I'm basically just going to go into a little bit of detail of what the metabase is and how the test reports are created, etc. To give you a bit of a background and a bit of a feel for what's going on. This is a statement from Dave Golden. Basically, the metabase is a database framework and web API to store and search opinions from anyone about anything. The key important points here are the fact that we're storing stuff as users, which are, in our instance, are testers, facts, which are elements about the reports, and the resources are the distribution and reports that we're actually trying to test. Essentially, it all kind of started back in 2008 at the Oslo QA Hackathon. David Golden and Ricardo Cygnus basically sat down and thought about how we can approach this. What's the best way we can actually do it? They had some design goals, which I'm going to go look at in a moment, to give them an idea of where we need to go. There was some extra work done at the Birmingham QA Hackathon in 2009, and they were starting to do actual coding at that point, and we got some bits and pieces to flying around between various developers to try and solidify ideas, etc. At the moment, it's based on a simple DB, which is based on the Amazon Web Services. It's not the greatest of databases, we've found out, but potentially we can look at something else in the future if it proves too much of a problem. At the moment, though, it's pretty much stable. We've ironed out some of the problems, or we've worked around them. Things are running pretty smoothly at the moment. As I mentioned, this is primarily written for the CPAN Testers at the moment. However, the intention was to look at whether we could use it for other things. And at the moment, we also have the Bleed Pearl smoke test, which is an application that Tux has written, and he's written the pack design to actually put into the metabase, which is quite cool. So very quickly, we've actually seen a reuse of the idea. And essentially, what's come out of this is these four particular modules are essentially what is the metabase. So if you actually want to look at more detail about the metabase, these are particularly the four you need to go and have a look at. So as I mentioned, there were some design considerations, and one of the things that's quite important for the CPAN testers is we have a hell of a lot of volume being submitted, reports being submitted. So our importance is submission over search. At the current time, there's only me searching the metabase with the generator to go and build the CPAN stats. In the future, we'll look at opening that search API up. But essentially, that's all there really is at the moment. We want it to be minimal. So when you're actually starting to run a client, we don't want people to have all this whole load of dependencies, because it kind of skews any testing you may be doing. So we've tried to look at ways we can actually have a minimal non-core dependencies, and in some cases we've tried to have zero dependencies and use other systems, which I'll mention later, where you're actually passing the actual reports off to something else that can have a bit more reliance on other CPAN dependencies, etc. We also wanted no barriers to contribution. At the moment, the SMTP, you can put in an email address and say, I'm the tester, and off you go. And often we actually get email addresses that are non-existent. They're actually invalid. So we don't know who the testers are. With the metabase, we wanted to provide a better way to actually say who you are, but we still wanted the no barrier to contribution. So things like Strawberry Pearl, for example, wants to set themselves up so they automatically submit test reports that people are installing without having ever set up the CPAN Testers client. So that's something they're going to be looking at shortly. Now we've got things settled with the 2.0 release. And we also wanted to look at how we could extend this. As I mentioned, we've got the Bleed Pearl side of things from a fact and resources point of view. But essentially, we wanted this to be able to be used anywhere. Who's to say that a customer, corporation can't set this up for their own uses, their own CPAN distributions internally, and be able to use something very, very similar. It's also quite pluggable underneath, certainly for the data storage. So you could potentially use something else to actually understand better what's going on. You could, at the moment, say it's a very simple DB kind of thing. You could potentially use DB or something like that, because essentially all we're holding is metadata, and it's actually held in JSON. And the important bit here at the end is the fact that the intelligent analysis is actually done by third parties. The metabase purely is a data store. It doesn't do anything else. The only thing that we're going to add to that is that the validation at some point, it isn't there at the moment, but the validation, as I mentioned, CPAN Testers is a problem for us. So that's something we will look at so that you can't submit invalid reports. There is a small part of that at the moment. So when you do submit a report, if there's anything that's slightly off, it will actually tell you immediately. And just to give you an idea, this is essentially how we're actually submitting the facts into a report. This is a spec for the report and how it's actually built. So this actually contains potentially, it's about 8, is it? Something like that, potentially different facts about the report. Currently, we only compile 2, which is the first 2, the legacy report and the test summary. But there's lots and lots of metadata we potentially can add to this. This is something we're going to look at in more detail as time goes on. So that's a fact report, and I hope you can all read that. There's lots of information there. That's essentially just a dump of the JSON field that's actually in the database. Essentially, it's to say it's made, mostly at the moment, it's made from 2 particular facts that we describe. And this is just to give you an example. I don't know if you can see that, it doesn't show up too well from this distance, but hopefully it shows a bit better back there. Essentially, you've got 2 parts. One is the content, one is the metadata. Inside the content, we've got some metadata relating to the report. I have missed out the text report because obviously that's the important bit, and obviously 50k and more trying to fit into one slide is pretty much the same as looking at that. But essentially the text report is the bit that contains the output from the test report. At the moment we're not looking too deeply into splitting that out, but that'll be one thing we're actually going to look at in the future. So things like the configuration line, the config -d stuff, things like the specific tap output, various diagnostics about the installed prerequisites, those kind of things that will be separated out and analyse them completely independently of the report. We won't have to write things that will actually pass the report. As I mentioned, there's a second one we actually have, which is test summary, and if you look closely, the only real difference is actually the fact that this doesn't contain the text report. This was kind of cobbled together fairly quickly to give us an idea of what we actually wanted to do. Essentially, what's going to happen in the future is pretty much all of the metadata here will stay in test summary, and the legacy report, all the metadata we currently have in test summary will start to disappear. This is primarily just for us for a quick reference to make sure everyone's working. We mentioned about resources earlier on. Essentially, this is the resource we're testing against, and we actually give it a unique ID to reference, so we can actually look at what reports are being presented for a particular resource. It just gives us a bit of an easier way to index things. So apparently, the simple DB has a better way of indexing things than a regular SQL data store. We could possibly look at something better in the future. The creator here is a profile ID for the actual tester or the smokebox. So potentially you could actually have half a dozen testers who have several different smokebox. And this is our way of actually identifying the individual smokebox. So if anything goes wrong, we can either identify the tester or we can try and identify the smokebox. On some occasions, a tester may just replicate the profile ID across all the smokebox, so you wouldn't necessarily identify a specific bot. But we've got a long way from where we were once upon a time, so it's definitely moving forward. As mentioned, there's lots of more extensions planned. Some of it is to do with parsing the report and storing that metadata completely separately. One of the things we want to look at better, which is not really provided very well at the moment, is the platform information. One thing that Birmingham Commons have worked on recently is this develop platform info, and it basically tries to analyse some very common information about the platform being run. The problem we have at the moment is if we analyse the reports, quite often the only information we have about the platform is contained in config -v. and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but if you're running a special version of Perl, you'll find that that config-b is completely different from what's actually running on the platform. It may have been compiled on a completely different machine, especially if it's a binary install. So the actual platform it's running on doesn't bear any relation. So this additional information will actually help us understand better what kind of platforms are being tested and how they're being tested. As also mentioned, we want to get more tap output, not just for the fail reports, which is what we currently get, but all sorts of things. So things for unknowns, not applicable, passes, all those kind of things. We want to get more information so we can do better analysis. So in some instances, even the passes may actually be fails. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but sometimes the passes can actually have warning errors. And once upon a time, some people were actually posting them as failures because essentially, in some cases, those are actually useful as well to the author. But that's kind of information we don't really get that much of these days, so hopefully we can analyse that in the future. So, I've kind of talked about where we've come from, how we've got to where we are, and looked a bit at the actual design. I want to kind of look at some of the ways you can actually join CPAN 2.0. One of the important bits we've got at the moment is to register yourself as a CPAN tester, and things are going to be moving much more in the way as mentioned, either registering for the box or for the user. So it's quite important that we try and encourage people to actually move in the right way. One of the questions that popped up on the mailing list recently, last week, was somebody actually asked, well, you tell us, you know, we use CPAN Reporter or CPAN plus X Mode, but why? Which one? I don't know. I'm new to it. What do I do? And it really is down to purely your own personal preference. We don't try and tell you which one's better because they're doing different things. They're looking from different perspectives. And if you're using CPAN.pm to install your modules, then you'll probably find CPAN Reporter fits better for what you're actually doing. Using CPAN Plus, obviously CPAN Plus X Mode will be probably more applicable to you. One thing to mention is, at the moment, CPAN Minus doesn't have any infrastructure to actually do CPAN reporting, and as far as I'm aware, Miego actually wrote it that way. So it's quite likely there won't be something in the future. But essentially, it comes down to the two key elements of either CPAN or CPAN Plus, whichever one you prefer, kind of dictates where you're going to go for your actual tool. There are many actual tools, as I mentioned earlier, based around each one of those, things like turnkey, clusters, automated boxing, all sorts of things. So if you want to go into more depth, there's all the information there to go and have a look at. And you can configure them in a variety of ways. I'm not going to talk about the configurations because that's a whole different talk on its own. There's lots of information on the wiki if you want to go and have a look, and there's various people on the mailing list who can help you out if you get stuck there. But you can do various interesting things like extracting or preventing certain distributions being tested, etc. So the test reporter now includes a HTTP transport layer, and that's basically the important bit to all of this that holds everything together. So if you're going to start installing, basically these are the required modules that you want to start looking at. If you haven't already got these installed, you may want to look at upgrading them. But essentially, this is all you really need as a tester. The first two are obviously the nuts and bolts of the actual testing. The next four are pretty much the guts of how the actual reports are created and generated and processed. These two, it's an either or.